Well, hello there, my love. Welcome back to the third offering in this 5-part series, Who is the Modern Day Priestess? And so in today's offering, we're going to be working with what it means to walk the priestess path. And we're going to be talking about the 9 core skills and practices that really create the foundation of what it means to walk the priestess presence path. And then we're also going to talk a little bit right now into who gets to call themselves a priestess and who is the one who says we can call ourselves a priestess. I want to talk into this because there's been quite a lot of controversy in our world around this subject. And I want to give some clarity from at least my lens about how I hold this very delicate subject. So, as we have come to understand, the priestess is a collective archetype. She doesn't belong to anyone. She's cross-cultural. She's found throughout history in every single culture. And as such, when we speak of priestess, we're really speaking of a collective consciousness. We're not speaking of one person. We're speaking of a constellation of characteristics that can be understood as making up the energy of the priestess. So, with that said, the priestess lives within every single one of us. Okay, we all have access to every single archetype, and we have equal access in the sense that I don't have more access than you have. I'm not more worthy than you, right? That's not how this works. So we all can have a relationship with the inner priestess, with the inner wise woman, with the inner mother, with the inner lover. You get the picture, right? They live within us. They're expressions of our humanity that are a collective set of traits that conform to a certain shape, if you will. Okay, so if we all can access the priestess within us, does that mean we all are priestesses? So herein lies the rub a little bit. For me, there's a discernment right here about accessing the priestess as an inner archetype to learn from, to deepen our own intuition, to come into connection with our own ability to navigate between the worlds, our decoding of symbols, our understanding of ritual and ceremony, right? We can access the priestess archetype for that. But for me, there's a discernment and a difference when we choose to step upon the path of the priestess and we choose to actually engage in walking as her. In other words, we start to commit ourselves to the skills and practices. We train ourselves. We take commitments and vows. We're held accountable. We start to begin to be part of a sisterhood that holds us in accountability to the integrity of what it means to walk as priestess. And so what I mean by that is that there is a very powerful choice that comes when we move from just being interested in the priestess archetype to actually training ourselves in our priestess skills. And I want you to feel the difference between those two. One of the things I've noticed in the culture at large is that with the rise of the archetype of the priestess, it's become kind of trendy. It's almost become like a meme. The priestess has been a word that's gotten used in all kinds of ways. And there's been a lot of talk about, well, has it been culturally appropriated? Have we been diluting? Like, just because you call yourself a priestess doesn't mean that you are a priestess. Like, where are your roots? Where is your lineage? Where are you being initiated from? Where are you being held accountable? And this is what I want to say is, as with the term shaman, this happened with the term shaman also, that there is a way in which, yes, our shadow ego who wants to own things and make money and be successful and be seen a certain way kind of grabs onto these terms. And if we're not careful, we can start to utilize them and use them in ways that are not in alignment, that are not in integrity. And so when you are walking through the world and you're in your own discernment, I'm going to ask you to begin to feel, how are you being called to relate to this word priestess? Are you curious, or are you deeply called to come upon the path? And it doesn't matter where you are in your calling, just to be real about where you are, and also to hold this term priestess in reverence. When you speak of the priestess, are you talking of your spiritual path, or are you talking about the archetype? Let's make a discernment. It's really, really important. So one of the things that I have desperately not wanted to happen in our world of priestessing is for there to be rules and regulations about who gets to call themselves that. And I want to explain to you why. In most of the world, we are governed by incredible rules and regulations and bureaucracies and red tapes and things that say we have to have this, that, and the other in order to be valid, in order to be worthy enough, right? That is the world that I certainly came from as being a psychotherapist. It's the world that I was doctored in and indoctrinated into. And it had all these red tapes and, pieces that you needed to fulfill. Now, there's value in that. And the value in that is that there are checks and balances, right? Because when anyone steps into the role of priestess, healer, therapist, counselor, doctor, you name it, right? You're stepping into a position of power. There's a power dynamic because people come to you in states of vulnerability in order to be held. And there is a certain code of conduct and an integrity and an accountability that comes when you step out to serve the world through those lenses. And that does need to be upheld. However, my sense of it is that needs to be upheld from within the community, from within the sisterhood that we move in. So for example, I am a 13 moon ordained priestess. And what that means is that I have a circle of sisters who I'm accountable to, who call me out and who do call me out if they see that I am somehow stepping out of integrity or I am not following through with the vows that I've taken, right, within the 13 Moon Mystery School lineage. And so there is a built-in integrity system because without accountability, there is no integrity. Right? We all need to be held accountable because our ego will always pull us into the initiation of the shadow of the part of us that can fall out of alignment and out of integrity and not always be our best version of ourselves. And that's as true of me as it is of anyone else. Our ability to own our shadow and to work with it is at the heart of the priestess path. To be willing to bring it forward into relationship in your community. And so I'm saying all of this because I want you to understand that when we talk about walking the priestess path, we're talking about being accountable to a sisterhood for the behavior, for the actions, for who we're being in any given situation. So, with all that said, are you ready to deepen upon this path, to learn a little bit more about what it means to practice the 9 core skills? And what I think would be really powerful for me to just walk you through each one of these skills and practices. And some of them may be familiar to you and some of them may not be. And just to notice which ones ping you, which ones say, oh, I really want to learn more about that, or this is one that I'm being called to practice, or, ooh, I bet that one could be useful for me, right? Just listen in and you can take some notes and actually just feel where you're being called to deepen. So let's begin. The very first skill that we work with is called the skill of remembrance. And it's the foundation upon which everything else is built because we are a temple of remembrance. The priestess path is a path of remembrance. Remember me talking about how our lineages, both our blood lineages and our spiritual lineages, have been severed, how much of what we would have known from our mothers and our grandmothers and those before that has been hidden and literally pushed into the underground, into the underbelly. What that means is that very few of us, and there are some, but very few of us have intact lineages connected into the divine feminine. We don't have the oracle stories. We don't have the original rituals for most of us that our foremothers were practicing. We don't have the healing ceremonies. We don't have the access to the history through the books, because guess what? The books mainly were written by men, and the books eradicated most of the memory of the divine feminine. And so we're working with a missing aspect of our history. And so the only way that we can go into remembrance is either through our own internal journeying. In other words, beginning to attune ourselves into the remembrance of our priestessing skills, the sacred technologies that have existed for aeons that are encoded within us. And that as we begin to enter into meditation and we begin to unlock and unpack our remembrance, we begin to have access again. So remembrance in this way literally means to remember, to bring back together that has been rent asunder, that has been disconnected into wholeness. So remembrance is like bringing all the parts of you from the future, from the past, from other dimensions through into this existence now, so that you can have access to the wholeness of who you are. So in this sense, memory and remembrance is not maybe how we think of it in terms of, I remember what happened yesterday or the day before or even last year. It is much more poetic. It is like a vibrational recognition, or when you hear a piece of music and you just know that you've heard it before even though you haven't, or you smell a scent and it takes you and transports you somewhere that you may never have been in this incarnation, but perhaps in another you have been. Okay, so there's a poetry to it. Now, obviously, there's also a kind of remembrance that could come through your family heritage, through your DNA, through your records of memoirs and or sharings that come through your grandmothers or your grandfathers. You know, there may be some excavation for you to do through your own personal lineage that can also show some connection into the divine feminine, into the practices that may have been alive. So as a temple of remembrance, we have a core practice of honing our skill of remembering and opening up our channels to receive information. So that is the first practice of remembrance, remembering the essence of who you are. That's the core value of this temple. It's the core mission of the Priestess Presence Temple. So then once we have built that skill of remembrance, we begin to open. Once we have built that skill of remembrance, we begin to open the doorways to our inner knowing, to our gnosis. The priestess path is one that is based on gnosis, which is the internal knowing, the internal wisdom. It says the teacher, the guru, lives within. And our capacity to access that inner teacher is based upon the ability that we have to remember that, to remember that the answer to the mystery lies within us. So the next skill that we go into is that of empty presence, which is probably the seminal skill of the Priestess Presence Temple and the 13 Moon Mystery School. And empty presence, if you just hear those two words together, empty presence, they are kind of paradoxical, right? There's kind of a way in which you kind of hit up against, well, what is it to be empty and present? But the core practice is to be able to have a way to still the static of the mind, the doubt, the confusion, the complexity that the thinking mind can get into, to be able to come into the quietness, into the center line of our own vessel, of our own bodies, to be able to become fully present, to fill our vessel with presence. And the presence is not the presence of our ego, but it's more the presence of our essence, the presence of our deeper self, our soul, whatever word you would use. And so there's all kinds of practices that we have that are about bringing us into empty presence. And it is from there that we are charged with coming into connection with the world, because when we're truly empty and present, we're able to show up to the world and meet the world in the requiredness of the moment. In other words, we're able to be available to what's happening. From empty presence, we come into a next set of skills, which is, I'm going to quintessentialize for you here, but it's called feeling, navigation, resonance, and coherence. And the postage stamp version of this is that we as priestesses are charged with awakening our capacity to know gnosis through all of our senses, not just this third dimensional world, but also the world of metaphor and image and symbol and dream time, the imagination, the world where we get to actually connect in with the soul language. You know, our soul doesn't talk to us in complete sentences. The soul language is poetic and it is felt. And when we begin to start to access into the subtleties of our feeling body, we start to receive all kinds of information through this vessel that are not available when we're just in our mind. It's really the realm of the feminine intelligence, emotional intelligence, sensation intelligence, heart intelligence, womb intelligence. All of those forms of intelligence live in our body and are accessed through our feeling system. And so beginning to navigate with the feelings is core to being able to connect with the deeper essence of who we are, the deeper truth of who we are, beyond the stories that we tell about who we are, is an essential being that is just waiting to be contacted and to be listened to. When we feeling navigate, we literally listen to others in a different way. And it is a skill that we are called to develop. When we develop that, we're able to bring a subtlety and a nuance and a sense of connection to the complexity of everything that's going on and listen for that which is being said under the words. It's a very profound skill to listen beyond the words, to listen to the music of the other person that you're listening to. So once we have started to open that skill up, we move to the next skill, which is really probably the one that is most needed, in my opinion, on the planet right now, and that's the awakening of our hearts. So in this skill, we practice removing the shields that we keep around our hearts to keep us defended. And it is an incredibly rigorous practice, because really what it asks us to do is to come to be very intimate with the word love and be really in the question and the query of what love actually is. And love is not what we've been taught it to be. Love is not this romantic, fluffy thing. Love is not conditional. Love is not some transactional experience. This is about awakening our hearts to the capacity that we have to love unconditionally. That means to love with no condition. And that is in of itself a very profound and rigorous practice to turn back towards love when we shut our hearts down, when we're in judgment, when we're in fear, when we're triggered, right? Can you come back to love? Because love is really the only thing that transforms anything. The presence of love is, we know, is the very thing that is needed to transform every other emotion, every other discordance, every other difficulty or challenge, when met with love, begins to transform. So our practice to become available to love is paramount. And once we've traversed that skill and begun to practice that, we get called into the skill and practice of aligning with our authentic power and sovereign alignment. And this asks us to begin to question and query and come in contact with how we use our power and how we misuse our power, how we abuse our power. And it comes to us to understand that authentic power is two things. It's energy and choice. And that we are constantly being charged with how we choose to use our energy. In service to what will you use your energy? In service to what will you bring your energy forward? To dismantling all of those systems that oppress people, to speaking up when others would run away, to choosing to be present with the difficulty and the complexity of the world rather than avoiding. Right? This is what it means to actually know that we have authentic power. It's not the power of the patriarchy that was that power over, the smashing power, the abusive power. It's an authentic power that sees the nobility of every being, that sees every being as worthy, and that every being has power within them. And then sovereign alignment, well, that's that place where we have to look at our motivations. We have to look at our intentions and our impact. and really get aligned with what it is that motivates us to do anything. And whether that motivation comes from our own woundedness, our own selfishness, our own unworthiness, or whether it comes from a place of connection into our high heart, into our divinity, into the wish for good for all beings. What is motivating you? So we have a lot of practices that bring us into the question of that. And then from there, of course, we come into the practice of integrity and truth. And as I was saying earlier on, this is about understanding what integrity is. In a world where everything we're fed, we can't trust, right? There is so much misinformation out there. There is so much swirling and twirling and curving of the truth. How do we know what's real? We have to hone that place of integrity within us, of what feels right, of what feels just, of what feels aligned in the world. And within ourselves, we have to be able to navigate that within us. There's no one out there can tell us what integrity feels like. We have to learn what integrity feels like. And then we have to be charged with the accountability of those around us to stay in our integrity. And that is a bedrock of how we are being called to show up in the world. If you don't know what your integrity is, then you cannot vision and hold others accountable or be held accountable yourself. In this age, it is a very slippery thing to talk about truth. And yet we have to find our way to the truth. Right? And my truth and your truth may be subjective and contextual, but what is the truth of a situation? It is true that people are being abused. It is true that people are being, violated. It is true that we live in a world that is unequal, that is filled with privileges. If you're in your integrity, then you're being called to see that. And the question is, what do you choose? How do you choose to use your privilege? How do you choose to use your power? From there, we move into a practice of devotion and blessing. And in a nutshell, this asks us, what are you devoted to? Devotion means stepping out of your ego's concerns. What are you devoted to? What are you willing to go the distance with? What are you willing to get uncomfortable? Where are you willing to roll up your sleeves, to get your hands dirty, to do the things that your ego would go, oh, I really don't want to do that. Are you willing? Are you willing to be devoted to something or someone that is greater than yourself? Like something that has a greater cause than your own comfort? That is what it means to be called into devotion. It is the devotion to serve. And I'm going to be speaking much more into this in our fifth offering around the heart of service and the priestess path and what that really looks like. So what are you devoted to? Then the next skill and practice is non-attachment. This is a biggie for our egos. So when we're on the path of the priestess, we're constantly being asked to disidentify with the label priestess. It doesn't make you special. It doesn't make you better. It doesn't make you more worthy, which is what our ego wants to do. It wants accolades. It wants to have certificates of completion, and it wants to be, known for and attached to, right? That's how we have status in this world. Well, the path of the priestess is not about building status. It's not about building an identity that you get to then, pretend that's yours. It's about seeing that when we play the role, when we inhabit the role of priestess, we are simply here to serve. And it is not about me, Elaine Kalila, being the priestess, which is why I never use the term high priestess. Because in my lexicon and in the 13 Moon Mystery School lineage, we don't speak about high priestesses because guess what? There were no high priestesses because that would insinuate a hierarchy. And we don't believe in that hierarchy. That is not the way in which we are training ourselves. So you can feel how attached we get, how easily attached we get to being important. And so we are charged with the practice of unimportantizing ourselves, if that's a word. And then the last skill and practice, this one is really powerful in the current context that we're living in. It's the practice of ecstasy, bliss, and freedom. It sounds like a tall order, but truly, A big practice of our priestess path is to be able to access into the ecstasy and the joy and the pleasure and the bliss and the freedom that comes when we start to align with our deeper truth of who we are, with the essence of who we are. And then we are charged with filling the chalice, literally filling ourselves up so that we can be of service from a full chalice, that we are able to bring lightness and levity and beauty into a world that is suffering, into the moments where there seems that there's nothing but darkness. We are charged with being able to hold both the light and the dark simultaneously, saying, I love the light as I love the shadow, for all things are transformed in love. That's a tall order, to hold ecstasy and bliss and pain and suffering simultaneously. And yet that is the paradox that we're being asked to hold, that we are all one and that we are diverse and different, that we are all individual and that we are all interconnected, right? These paradoxes are at the heart of our human condition, and at the heart of the priestess path is the practice to become comfortable with the discomfort of embracing it all, being uncomfortable in the comfort, being comfortable in the discomfort, being able to be in all those realms, being at peace with being out of sorts and being at peace with being in joy. That is the ask. And so these practices are the foundation upon which we base our priestess path. So I want you to take a moment to just feel into those 9 skills and practices, and there's so much more to be said about those and what the actual practice is itself. But this was just a little dipping the toe in the water so that you could actually feel that there's a groundedness here. There's a rubber meets the road here. There's an accountability here. This is not just some fluffy, wishy-washy thing. This is actually a path of spiritual maturation and initiation, and it's hard and it demands a lot, but that's what we really mean when we are talking about walking the path of the priestess. Now, can you choose how you walk this path? Certainly you can choose. You can just dabble in it and use these spiritual ideals as ways to develop yourself, or you can go the whole hog and into the deep training and initiation within this path, and you can go anywhere in between. But I just wanted to give you a sense of what we mean when we talk about walking the path of the priestess. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you about which one of these skills and practices pinged you, which ones you already have a practice for, or which ones you know you need more support in. Okay? And I will return with our next offering, and looking forward to deepening with you into the realms of who is the modern day priestess and how is she calling us forward. Many blessings.